One of the words that most impact the mind of the listener is the word sex. When we mention the word sex, generally we imagine a bed and a man and a woman having sexual relations. But is that all that sex is? Could it be that God created marriage to endure boring sex? Sexuality without feelings? Or could God have created marriage with other objectives in mind? And we may be the ones failing in meeting these objectives dreamed of for marriage. Today, I'm going to tell you 10 words that bring sexual happiness within marriage. 10 words that have to do with what God intended from the beginning in order for you to enjoy a full sexual experience. The first word, in order to have a happy sexual life, is the word love. This word has at times been confused because it has been linked to sexuality. Let's make love. But there's no such thing. Love cannot be made or undone. Love is experienced. Sexuality could then be considered as a final expression of all the love experienced by one person towards another. So what is love? Love is the voluntary decision of surrendering ourselves to the cause of making someone else completely happy. This means that in marriage, when we make a covenant of love before God, I am willing to give all of me for the benefit of making my spouse happy. In the sexual element, it works the same way. I am willing to give myself sexually for the happiness of my spouse. So love is what drives. It is the foundation of all sexual expression. When there is love, there will always be happiness. Besides the fact that sex may have its ups and downs, preserves the essence of sexuality and the potential to grow in the experience of it, in spite of sexuality itself being inconsistent. When two people love each other, each is thinking about the happiness of the other individual. And this is why, when they find each other in the element of intimacy, there is nothing greater, as long as there is love. A key word for the sexual happiness is the word exclusivity. God asked us to focus our sexual energy on one person, because this gives us the possibility of connecting through a lifelong period, to have a deeper understanding of the other person. And the more understanding and longevity there is in a loving relationship, the couple connect more and more and find greater ways to expressing their sexuality. There is no sexual happiness without exclusivity. Studies have found that couples who are happily married, besides having better sex, they each live longer than those who live alone or have experienced divorce. This is one reason why God advises us to not employ sexual energy with strangers, going from one place to the next, but to focus on the loved one since our youth, from which relationships will draw satisfaction and renewed energy in life, and not just for our daily life, but the energy to live a full sexual experience. Another word that may enhance the sexual experience is the word complementing. The idea of the husband and wife complementing each other. God created both man and woman to his own image. The Word of God says that God said, "Let us make man to our image." And God created a man and also a woman. In other words, two beings that can complement each other, just as God is three persons in one. the wife and the husband in the relationship of marriage with God, creating a trinity of sorts which enables the sexual satisfaction of the couple. God created them with different sexual characteristics, but compatible. For example, for the woman to be happy, she must first be spiritually and emotionally happy. It is very important to know that her spouse understands these needs. If he is able to meet those needs, she's then ready to meet the physical needs of the man. Men have greater physical needs. Another characteristic is that men are focused on the present. Generally, when they have sexual desires, they're immediate, now, while women have the characteristic of being focused on what's ahead. One could say this derives from a motherly sense. For this reason, when a man provides a sense of exclusiveness and security, the woman feels so stable about her future that she's able to give herself daily, and men become sexually happier in the here and now. We could name many other sexual characteristics, but the important thing is for men and women to learn about how God created one another in order to complement each other. If they love one another, they will seek each other's happiness, and they must get to know each other in order to do this. Complementing each other in the eyes of God is another of the essential elements in making each other sexually happy. Another word for sexual happiness is the word intelligent. Sexuality is not built on random elements, but on the ability of the man and the woman to get to know each other every single day. Sexuality is dynamic, driven by changing elements that each person may be experiencing depending on the moment or the times. This will allow a complete, intimate experience. When God created animals, He created couples. But He created Adam alone. In the perfect environment where each animal had a mate, Adam had to realize his need for companionship. It would not be by instinct like animals. It would be by intelligence that he would be motivated to unite with a spouse. And so Adam eventually felt alone around the garden. He started to look around and saw that all the animals had a mate, and he felt alone. He saw his need. It is at this time that God put him to sleep and made a woman. When Adam wakes up, he's able to recognize intelligently the woman that would represent him and would be part of him. They then united in an intimacy which grew greater through time. This is the way each couple should be when it comes to sexuality. Things are not always the same. Not everything is by instinct. Each day there are basic needs. Each man and each woman have their moments. And it's up to them to intelligently recognize these moments in order to make their intimacy greater when it is experienced. May we be able to exercise that sexual intelligence each day in order to grow not only in physical intimacy, but in all elements of a loving relationship. We must understand roles within a relationship. The next word towards sexual happiness is the word roles. In the biblical book Songs of Solomon, we see the interaction between a husband and wife. And what they display most of all is the roles as lovers. What God wants us to learn first of all about marital life is that our primary role is to be lovers to each other. Ultimately, this is what we promised before God when we were married. we were asked,
la amarás,
will you love him?
lo amarás.
Will you love her?
Por lo tanto, lo que Dios
So what God
necesita
needs
y
and wants
quiere
from us
para
in order
poder
to
otorgarnos
fill us
felicidad
with
plena
complete
es
happiness
que nosotros
is for us to
cumplamos
fulfill this marital role
de una forma
in a fundamental way.
Hay otro pasaje
There's
en la
another passage
Escritura,
in the scriptures where
en
Paul
Corintios, donde Pablo
tells us
nos
that
habla
we
que
are
nosotros
not
no
in
somos
charge of our own bodies,
cuerpo,
but that our
sino
husbands and our
nuestro
wives
y
are.
nuestra esposa. Inclusive
It
dice
even
ahí que
says that
nosotros
we should
no
not deny
debemos
ourselves sexually
negar
from our spouse.
el uno al otro. Pablo tenía
Paul was
bien
very clear
claro
about the
que la
fact
función
that
primaria
primary
del
roles
hombre
of the man
y
and
de
the
la
woman
mujer
within the
en
context of
matrimonio
marriage
es de ser
is that of
amigos.
being lovers.
Muchos,
Many,
a medida que va
as
pasando
their
el
marriage
tiempo,
advances through time,
estar
tend to
casados,
lose their
van
passion.
perdiendo esa
They lose
pasión,
sight of
van
love and
perdiendo
sight
el
of the
amor,
role
van
as a
perdiendo
lover,
el
and
rol
maybe
de amante.
dedicate
Y
themselves
quizás se
more to the
dedican
role
más
of
a
a
ser
parent.
padres. Pero ¿saben qué?
But the truth
La
is
seguridad de los
that the
hijos
sense of security
con
on a
respecto a
child
sus padres
when it comes to their
es que ellos
parents
estén seguros que los
is
padres
for
se
them
aman.
to feel sure that their
Cuando ellos
parents
saben
love
que los
each other.
padres
When they
tienen
know their
un
parents share
mutuo
a
amor,
mutual
y no
bond,
solamente eso,
and
sino
even that
que
their parents
ellos
are
son
sexually
felices
happy,
sexualmente, Dios
God wants
desea
our
nuestra
sexual
felicidad
happiness.
sexual. Y Él sabe
And He knows that having our roles in the right order,
vamos a
we
conseguir.
will find it.
Por lo tanto, no te
And He
distraigas,
knows
sea
that
amante
this
primero,
will
luego
not
esposo,
happen
y
alone.
luego padre, que
You will not
seguramente
only find
en ese
happiness,
orden
but you
vas
will
a tener
also
la
find
felicidad
it for
completa,
your
no
spouse
solamente de
and
tu
for
pareja,
your
sino
children.
también de tu familia. Una de las palabras
One word that is
ligadas
inevitably linked to sexuality
al
is the
sexo
word
es la
pleasure.
palabra placer. ¿Cómo es el
How does
placer
pleasure work in the
en
context
una
of a
relación
Christian marital relationship?
cristiana? El placer
Pleasure is a gift
es
from
un
God.
regalo de Dios, un regalo
He made
de
us with the
Dios,
ability to
porque
feel
Dios nos
pleasure
hizo con
at
la
the point of
capacidad de
physical
sentir
contact.
placer al contacto físico. Pero en la
But in the
Biblia el
Bible,
placer no se busca,
pleasure is not
el
seeked,
placer viene,
but rather
el
it is
placer
the
llega
result
como
of a relationship.
resultado de una relación. En Cantar de los
Again,
Cantares,
in Songs
los
of Solomon,
esposos están
the
disfrutando
couple
de estar
appears to be
juntos y se
happy
nota
to
que
be
la
together in the
el
relationship,
placer llega a
and
ellos.
pleasure comes to them as a
Por
result.
eso no hay que
There
tener
is
una
not
búsqueda
a need for an intense search
intensa
for
de
things,
sentir cosas, una búsqueda
a
egoísta
selfish
del placer,
search for
sino
pleasure.
buscar dar placer al
Rather,
otro,
seek to give pleasure to the other person,
dejando que el placer
including
llegue
allowing
a partir
the pleasure
de
to
una
arrive
vida
through the experience of being
entrega
connected to
a la
one
otra
another.
persona.
We should be
Nosotros
able to
podemos
enjoy
sentir
the
el
simple
placer de
pleasures
una
of
mirada,
a look,
el placer de una
a
conversación, el
conversation,
placer de caminar
the
juntos,
pleasure of walking
el placer
together,
de poder tener
the pleasure of
actividades
sharing common
comunes
activities
que nos
that will
ayuden
help
a
us get to know
conocernos.
each other better.
Y cuando hay placer
And when
en
there
un
is pleasure in a
montón de
diverse number of
en un montón de
circumstances
situaciones
within
en la vida
marriage,
matrimonial, seguramente el
pleasure will
placer va a
certainly
venir
come inevitably in the
irremediablemente
marital
a la
bed.
cama matrimonial. Cuando dos
When a couple
personas
is united by
están
love,
unidos en amor,
they
cada
each
uno
seek to
busca el
fulfill
placer
each
del
other's
otro.
pleasure.
Y el placer
Pleasure
llega,
arrives.
irremediablemente llega. No están obsesionados
They are
solamente
not obsessed
con que
in
cada
seeking
uno llegue al
orgasm.
orgasmo, sino que cada uno está
They are concerned about
buscando
each
la
other's
felicidad del
enjoyment,
otro y finalmente
and the
el
orgasm
orgasmo
will
va a
be
ser
the
el
result.
resultado. Tenemos que
For this
tener
reason,
claro que
we need to
el
be clear that
placer se logra
pleasure can be
en
achieved
todos
in
los
all
ámbitos de la
aspects
vida,
of life
llega a todos los ámbitos de la vida de la persona cuando
when the
ellos
relationship
hacen
is
de
the
la
priority.
relación lo principal. Ojalá
May we all be
que
able
cada
to
uno de
grow
nosotros
in our
podamos
relationships
hacer crecer nuestra
each day
relación día a día
in order to find
para
pleasure
poder
not only in the bedroom,
tener placer no solamente
but
en
in
la cama,
everything
sino
we
en
do
cada
together.
cosa que se haga juntos. Otra palabra que tiene
Another
que ver
word
con la
is the
felicidad
word
sexual en el
variation.
matrimonio es la palabra
Variation.
¿Qué significa
What does this
la
mean?
variación?
Variation
La
means
significa
that we
que
cannot always do the
nosotros no
same
podemos hacer
things
las
the
cosas de la
same way,
misma forma,
in the
al
same
mismo
place,
tiempo, en el mismo
all the
lugar, todos
time,
los días de la vida.
every day of our lives.
El sexo se nutre de la
Sexuality
de
feeds
muchas
of the variation of
Cuando leemos Cantar de
experiences.
los Cantares, nosotros
When we
vemos
read Songs
ahí
of Solomon, we
las
find
personas que están involucradas
that the people
no
involved
están
are not
haciendo
doing
lo
the
mismo
same thing in
todos
every
los
chapter of the
capítulos
book.
del libro del Cantar de los Cantares. Y es por eso que
This
es
is why
clave
it is
para la
key for
felicidad
sexual
sexual
happiness
tener
to
variación
enjoy
de
a
tiempo,
variation of
de
time,
forma, de
form,
lugar,
and places, as long as what is done is never humiliating or causes grief to the one or the other while being pleasurable for each other. There should be respect and consideration of preferences and backgrounds. It will probably not be the same experience through the years. It will not be the same the first year of marriage as it will be on the 20th year. As a matter of fact, on the 20th year, it should be much better. That's what God is looking for in each marriage. Growth in every way. And as they grow, they will experience sexually what physical intimacy is about. Variation is a key word in order to be happy in marriage. Another key word in the pursuit of sexual happiness is the word technique. Which is the place of sexual techniques in the context of a Christian marriage? I see they're praying here, and this is key in order to have sexual happiness, because they are turning over their intimate time to God. Only with God we can be completely happy. I think it's time for me to walk away, because what happens here is entirely theirs. We can keep talking about techniques. Sexual techniques are adapted to the couple and not the couple to the technique. There are a lot of books available, both Christian and not, that speak about technique. But the most important thing in a Christian marriage are the principles that govern the relationship and their behavior. Once they're together, they seek out the techniques. They must be shaped and adapted to the principles that govern the relationship, which is based in God. There is a word which has an apparent negative connotation, but it is important to be able to explore it. It's the word disenchantment, sexual disenchantment. It would appear that when we're connected to God and are following the principles of sex which God has placed in His Word, everything should be happiness and joy and everything should go well, but that's not necessarily the case. In the Bible appears the story which presents the issue of sexual disenchantment, where in Songs of Solomon, chapter 5, in apparently an ideal relationship where there is love and where the husband and the wife are passionate about each other, there too we find disenchantment. The wife is sleeping and waiting for her husband. He arrives and seeks sexual attention, but she doesn't respond. And so he leaves. When she realizes what just happened, she wants to respond, but he's no longer there. And she runs through the city. And while she does that, other men seek to gain her attention, but her only goal is to find her husband. And when they eventually find each other, the passion and the experience returns. And this time, it is even more fulfilling than anything previous. What did God want to illustrate to us through this story? That in life there will always be ups and downs, that things will not always be at a high, that it doesn't matter if there may be a few sexual disenchantments. The important thing is how we react as we face it. In a couple who truly love one another, this can serve as a challenge which can launch them further. It is a challenge to go and seek a way to find one another once again, to find each other in the midst of God, to find one another sexually as well, to find one another emotionally, and why not even find each other spiritually? Let's keep one thing clear. In spite of having a good relationship with God, even when His principles are governing our lives, even when we love our husbands and our wives, being intelligent in our relationship and are doing every other thing we should, that doesn't mean there will never be disenchantments. But may they only serve as a catalyst for a reconnection with each other. The last word that probably encompasses all other words we have discussed about marital sexuality is the word transcendency. What does that mean? Well, truth is that sexuality is created to elevate us beyond. It can be a sacred experience. Maybe due to our cultural context or the upbringing we might have received, we can find it difficult to understand what sexuality means in the context of scriptures. In Ephesians chapter 5, Paul says, "My brothers, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it." Later on he says, "For this reason man shall leave mother and father and will join his wife, and they will become one." Evidently, sexuality and the connection of a man and a woman into becoming one, and expressed through sexual union, illustrates how God gave himself for humanity. This makes it ultimately a sacred experience, a religious experience, something that will elevate us above earthly things in order to understand who God really is. In the book of Genesis, God says that the perfect union between a man and a woman is an image of God. In the New Testament, we are shown that the union of the groom and his bride shows us how God gave himself for the salvation of humanity. We cannot cheapen that concept. We cannot separate sexuality from life. We cannot separate sexuality from religion. For this reason, a sexual experience blessed by God will always be a religious experience. If your sexuality is not within the path intended by God, it is unlikely that you will understand who God is. And if you cannot understand God better through the experience of your intimacy and sexuality, you are missing out in one of the most glorious experiences God has ever created for us to enjoy, because ultimately His gift is the ability to experience the pleasure of living in a loving experience.